Welcome back to LexTalk, exploring English and linguistics in Thailand. For all of you educators and parents out there, and really anyone who just loves the English language, get ready for another deep dive. And this time we're tackling the world of motivation.
Yeah, it's one of those topics that always gets me going.
Hmm,
Because without motivation, let's face it, learning English or anything really, it just becomes so much harder.
it really does. And today we're going to try to really understand why understanding how motivation works is so important.
Yeah.
Especially, you always hear about this intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right?
Yeah, it's not just some theory you read in a textbook.
Yeah.
This is about understanding what really drives us all, what keeps us going, whether you're the one learning or you're helping others on their journey with English.
Okay, so before we get too deep into it, let's start with the basics.
Mm.
How would you define motivation, when we're talking about learning English here in Thailand?
I think about motivation as that engine that keeps your language learning going strong. It affects how much effort you're willing to put in, how you handle the tough stuff, and in the end, how well you really master English.
So it's not just about wanting to learn. It's that force that keeps you moving forward, that helps you keep going when it gets challenging.
That's it. Exactly. It's like that extra push you need to keep practicing, keep aiming for fluency, even when there are other things you'd rather be doing.
You were mentioning something interesting before we started recording. You were saying how motivation, or the lack of it, is something you see all the time when you're working with English learners here.
Oh, it's true. I've met so many students who are incredibly talented and capable, but they just hit this wall because they're not even sure why they're learning English. They're going through the motions, but there's no spark.
Yeah, and that's where understanding those different types of motivation becomes so important, right?
Hmm.
Like, are we driven by something inside of us, or are there things pushing us from the outside?
You got it. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Okay, let's break that down. What does intrinsic motivation actually look like in real life?
Okay, picture this. You have a student who just gets completely lost in an English novel. Not because they have to read it for homework, but because they're genuinely hooked on the story. Or someone who can spend hours watching English movies just for the fun of it. They're absorbing the language without even realizing it.
So it's that pure joy of learning, that feeling of excitement when you can finally express yourself in English.
Exactly. It's all about finding that drive within you, that passion that keeps you going, even when there's no reward waiting for you at the finish line.
But wouldn't you say that having some extrinsic motivation is important too? Especially here in Thailand, where being good at English is so tied to doing well in school and getting a good job.
Absolutely. That drive that comes from things outside of you, like wanting good grades or a better job, even just impressing your friends, that's extrinsic motivation. And it's powerful. It gives you structure goals to aim for, and it can be super effective for reaching those short-term targets.
So we're not saying that one type of motivation is automatically better than the other.
No, not at all. It's more about understanding how they work together, how they affect the way we learn in different ways.
I'm starting to see how this gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So let's dig into that. How does each type of motivation actually change the way someone learns English?
Well, think about it. Someone who's intrinsically motivated, someone who finds English fascinating, they're more likely to really engage with the language. They're not just memorizing lists of words. They're looking for real experiences, making connections, having fun while they learn.
It's like the difference between someone forcing themselves to eat vegetables because they know it's good for them and someone who actually enjoys the taste and makes them a natural part of their meals.
I love that analogy. And on the flip side, someone who's mostly driven by extrinsic motivation, they might be super disciplined and focused, especially in a structured classroom setting. But they could also be more likely to get anxious, feel the pressure to perform, and be less willing to take risks, especially when it comes to actually speaking English.
I can see that. If your main goal is to ace a test, you might not be as willing to step out of your comfort zone and try having a real conversation in English. You'd be too afraid to make mistakes to not get that immediate reward.
You hit the nail on the head. That's a crucial point. And it really shows how important it is to find that balance between the two, because ideally we want learners to be driven by both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
So it's like a dance, right?
Yeah.
You need that passion inside to fuel your journey, but you also need those goals from the outside to guide you and keep you focused.
Exactly. And for all you educators and parents listening in, that's where the challenge and the real opportunity comes in. How do we create learning environments that tap into both kinds of motivation?
I'm so glad you brought that up because I'm really excited to dig into some practical tips and strategies.
Let's do it. But first, let's take a quick moment to remind our listeners to follow LexTalk on all our platforms, our website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, and Spotify. You can find us at LexTalk Podcast.
We'll be right back with some actionable advice on how to spark that motivation and make learning English a truly rewarding experience. Stay tuned. Welcome back to LexTalk. Right before we jumped to the socials, we were getting into the good stuff, figuring out how to tap into both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation when it comes to learning English. So let's jump right into some strategies we can all use.
Okay, so first let's tackle that intrinsic motivation, that love of learning that comes from within.
Hmm.
How can we help our students or even ourselves really develop that?
Because you can't just force someone to be passionate about English. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think it all starts with recognizing that learning should be enjoyable. We have to get away from that old idea that English is just another boring subject all about memorization and tests.
So how do we make it fun? What are some things we can actually do?
Well, think about bringing in things that students are already excited about, like music, movies, video games, even social media. Why not have them analyze song lyrics, write movie reviews, or even create scripts for their own little films instead of just reading those dry textbook passages?
I love that. It's all about making English relevant to their lives, showing them how they can use it to explore things they're interested in and express their own creativity.
And don't forget about the power of choice. When students get to have a say in what they're learning, their intrinsic motivation goes way up. Let them choose topics for presentations or writing assignments that really grab their attention.
Yeah, it's like that saying, choose a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. Maybe we can apply that same idea to learning a language.
Exactly. And this goes for teachers too. If you're really passionate about a certain area of English, let that excitement shine through in your teaching. Your students will pick up on that energy.
Speaking of energy, let's talk about that extrinsic motivation. It sometimes gets a bad rap, but I think it's super important, especially here in Thailand, where being fluent in English can open so many doors.
I agree. The key is to use extrinsic motivation in a way that works with intrinsic motivation, not against it. It's all about setting goals, having some structure, and recognizing achievements without piling on too much pressure.
So how do we find that balance?
One really effective strategy is gamification, adding game-like elements to the learning process, like giving out points badges or having friendly competitions can make studying more engaging and give students a sense of accomplishment.
I've seen that work so well in my own classroom. Even just doing something simple like a word of the day challenge can really get students excited about learning new vocabulary.
Exactly. It taps into that natural drive we all have to challenge ourselves and be recognized for our efforts. And let's not forget about those real-world rewards. We need to show students how English can help them reach their goals, whether it's getting their dream job, traveling the world, or connecting with people from other culture.
That's so true, especially here in Thailand, where tourism is such a big industry and the job market is becoming more and more international. Those real-world benefits are a huge motivator. It's not just about passing a test, it's about giving students the skills they need to succeed in life.
Absolutely. And it's not just about dangling a reward in front of them. It's about helping them figure out their own reasons for learning English, their own why.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from making learning fun and relevant to tap into that intrinsic motivation to using things like goal setting and real-world rewards to harness that extrinsic motivation. But in the end, it seems like the key is really personalization.
You're spot on. There's no magic formula for motivation. What works for one student might not work for another. It's all about understanding their individual needs, interests, and learning styles.
Which leads us perfectly to our next episode. In our next episode, we'll be diving into language learning strategies for different learning styles to help you figure out how to personalize your approach to English for the best results. But before we get there, let's take a minute to recap what we've learned today about how powerful motivation can be when it comes to language learning.
We've really explored these two main types of motivation, right? Intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation, that's the fire that burns inside you, that pure joy of learning. Think about the student who can't put down an English novel, or the one who just can't get enough English language music.
Yeah, and we saw how that intrinsic motivation really leads to deeper learning, better remembering, and a more genuine connection with the language.
Right. And then there's that extrinsic motivation, that drive that comes from things outside of you, like grades, job opportunities, or even just being recognized by others. It's incredibly strong when it comes to setting goals and giving you that structure, especially in a place like Thailand, where being fluent in English is becoming more and more valuable.
But as we talked about, the real magic happens when we can find that sweet spot between those two forces.
It really is like a dance. You need that passion inside to keep you moving forward to make the journey fun. But you also need those goals from the outside world to give you direction and keep you on track.
And for all the educators and parents out there, we went over some practical ways to encourage both kinds of motivation. Remember, it's all about making learning fun and relevant, giving students choices, adding in game-like elements, and showing them how being fluent in English can really benefit them in the real world.
But maybe the most important thing to remember is this. Motivation isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. What motivates one learner might not work for another. It's about understanding their individual needs, tapping into their unique interests, and creating learning experiences that really resonate with them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we really want you to think about your own motivations. What drives you to learn or teach English?
Is it that love of language, the chase for rewards, or a mix of both? And how can you use what we talked about today to make your own language learning journey or your students' experience more engaging and rewarding?
We'd love to hear from you. Share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to follow LexTalk on all our platforms, our website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, and Spotify. We're at LexTalk Podcast.
Let's talk, let's learn.
Let's LexTalk.